Well, good afternoon, 6th Avenue. It has been a joy to be with y'all today. I'm really thankful that I got to be here and to see a lot of and we can do things really, really well for God. But as we do that, we have to be careful about how we approach the things that we do very well. And so if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to Acts 14. We're going to be there for the majority of this afternoon. And we're going to look at a couple guys who were very, very good at what they did. But before we get there, when someone is extraordinarily good at something, we put them on a pedestal. We want to honor them for what they're good at. We like to give out awards and trophies and medals and recognition to those who deserve it, right? If they're accomplished at something. In some cases, extraordinary individuals are sometimes labeled as the gods of their craft or the gods of their field, right? If you're into superheroes, you may remember the Justice League. Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman, all them. Well, there was a video game that came out a few years ago about them, and it was called Gods Among Us. I found it interesting that they called those superheroes gods, right? We know they're not gods, but that's what they were described as. Or maybe you're not a DC fan, maybe you're a Marvel fan. You know these guys, Thor and Loki. In the books and the TV shows and stuff, they're called the gods of thunder and mischief. Not really gods, but one of them is known for his powers with thunder and lightning. The other one is known for being mischievous. And so they're called the gods of those crafts. Or maybe superheroes aren't your thing. Maybe football is your thing. And I know we're in Alabama, so maybe that'll talk to more people. And talking NFL at first, this guy is often called the god of football, right? Because he's so good. And I'm not a Tom Brady fan, but I cannot deny that he's good. But we know that he's not really the god of football, right? It's Nick Saban. No, I'm just kidding. There's no actual god of football, right? There are people that are very good at football, but they're certainly not the gods of that. I saw something that somebody put out a survey to determine the god of rock and roll music, and I thought that was interesting. So I was curious to know what the results were, and they had about 4,000 people fill out the survey, and they determined that Freddie Mercury of Queen was the god of rock and roll music. Once again, not a god, we know that. He's just a person. But it's interesting that people will label other people as gods. Another one that I find really interesting is this is in the dome of the United States Capitol building. And I didn't know about this until preparing for this lesson. This painting is called the Apotheosis of Washington. What it is it depicts Washington ascending to heaven and becoming a god on our very own Capitol building. Even one of the founders of our nation who did a lot of great things for our country has been depicted in a godlike form. So it's interesting that that's kind of how we as humans, we tend to do that. We put people on a godlike pedestal when they're good at something. And so if you're at Acts 14, let's go there. Acts 14, I want to read verses 1 through 18 with y'all. In Iconium, they entered the synagogue of the Jews together and spoke in such a way that a large number of people believed, both of Jews and of Greeks. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the minds of the Gentiles and embittered them against the brothers. Therefore they spent a long time there, speaking boldly with reliance upon the Lord, who was testifying to the word of his grace, granting that signs and wonders be performed by their hands. But the people of the city were divided, and some sided with the Jews, while others with the apostles. And when an attempt was made by both the Gentiles and the Jews with their rulers to treat them abusively and to stone them, they became aware of it and fled to the cities of Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe, and the surrounding region. And there they continued to preach the gospel. Now in Lystra, a man was sitting whose feet were incapacitated. He had been disabled from his mother's womb and had never walked. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke. Paul looked at him intently and saw that he had faith to be made well, and he said with a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And the man leaped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." And they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, since he was the chief speaker. Moreover, the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard about it, they tore their robes and rushed out into the crowd, crying out and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We are also men of the same nature as you, preaching the gospel to you, to turn from these useless things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything that is in them. In past generations he permitted all the nations to go their own ways, yet he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness, and even by saying these things only with difficulty did they restrain the crowds from offering sacrifices to them." As we consider Acts 14, and as we start to make the decisions to do things for Christ and his kingdom and use our talents for him, one of the lessons that we can learn from Acts 14 is that we are all competent and capable of something. Go back to Acts 14, verse 1. In Iconium they entered the synagogue of the Jews together and spoke in such a way that a large number of people believed, both of Jews and of Greeks. In the case of Paul and Barnabas, they were exceptional at speaking, right? That was their talent. That was their ability they've been blessed with. And they were able to perform miracles, right? That's not something that we can do. That was something that they were blessed to be able to do to help the church get on its feet. And they were very good at those things, right? So what are you good at? What are you good at? It's okay to admit that you are good at something. I don't think that it's prideful to say that you are good at something if you have the right heart about it. In fact, a lot of us struggle the opposite way, thinking maybe we're not good at anything at all. Now, sometimes we say, I'm not good at anything, or you brush off compliments and stuff, and that's done out of humility, and I respect that a lot. But at the same time, to say that you are not good at anything is a lie. I don't care who you are good at something. God has blessed you with some talent, some ability to be used for his kingdom. And maybe you don't know what that is yet, but you do have something that you can offer to the kingdom, to the church. And so, what are you good at? I want to go to Genesis chapter 1. Turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, I'll be reading from. Talking about the creation of mankind, and I find it interesting what God says about us as he creates us. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. You're created in the image of God, right? God is neither incompetent nor useless. I don't think any of us would think that. And if you're created in the image of God, then neither are you. You are not incompetent and you are not useless. And so something to be learned from this passage is that we should not criticize God's creation by believing the worst about ourselves. We are good at something. We all are. I truly believe that. But as we're good at something, or if we are good at something, what we need to do is we need to identify our strengths and we need to capitalize on them. I'm going to tell you about a man. This man right here. His name is Howard Hill. He has been labeled the world's greatest archer. Now, Howard grew up in Alabama in the early 1900s. He went to what is now Auburn University, where he played baseball, basketball, and football. He was considered a very good athlete. He was never elite. It wasn't the best, but he was good. He was still good enough to be on the team. He graduates college, and he ends up playing semi-pro baseball. That's where he decides to go. But as he's playing semi-pro baseball, he starts to realize that he's not going to move on much farther. The other guys on the team are better than him, and so he's not going to move up the ranks. And in fact, it's probably not going to be long until he gets cut. He's going to lose his position on the team. He just did not have the ability in baseball as the other players did. So, of course, this is discouraging, and he's an athlete, but he's just not the best, and he wants to use his athletic abilities in some way. And so he thinks back to college. He was involved in a lot of sports. One of the things he did was he taught archery lessons to help pay for college. And so he quits baseball and he turns to archery, which ends up being the sport that he was the best at. After identifying his strength of archery and capitalizing on it, Howard won 196 archery competitions in a row. In 1928, he set a new world record for the farthest recorded flight shot with a bow and arrow at 391 yards. That may have been, beat since 1928, but at the time, it was the farthest. He produced multiple movies. He's in the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, the Archery Hall of Fame, and the Bow Hunters Hall of Fame. I didn't even know some of those existed, but he's in those. Howard knew that he wasn't the best at what he was doing, but he wanted to be the best. And so he discovered something that he didn't realize, maybe that he was so good at, but he found a strength, he capitalized on it, and he did indeed become the best at his craft. Go back to Acts. Look at Acts chapter 13, right before our passage in chapter 14. Acts chapter 13 and verse 50 through 52. I want to read those for you. But the Jews incited the devout women of high standing and the leading men of the city, stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas, and drove them out of their district. But they shook off the dust from their feet against them and went to Iconium. And the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. And then skip down to chapter 14, verses 5 and 6. When an attempt was made by both Gentiles and Jews with their rulers to mistreat them and to stone them, they learned of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding country, and there they continued to preach the gospel. Paul and Barnabas knew that they could speak in a way that would touch people's hearts. They had abilities, they'd been blessed with gifts to do so, but they also knew that there were some environments where their talents were not being put to use, right? And so instead of just staying where they were and kind of spinning their wheels in the mud, they shook off the dust from their feet and they moved to a new location where they could put their talents to better use. So as we think about this, as the things that we want to do for God's kingdom, I think we all want to be effective workers in God's kingdom. And if we do, then the next step for us is to identify what we are good at and then do it as effectively as possible. That may mean changing some of the ways that we've done things. That may mean moving somewhere different where we can be more effective. It may be focusing your evangelistic efforts with different people or in different areas. But don't just look for ways to be good at something as a Christian. Look for ways to be the best at something. And not because you are amazing or you're trying to get all the accolades and recognition, but because you want God to be glorified. And why wouldn't we give Him our best if we truly want Him to be glorified? Go back to Acts 14. Another lesson to learn from Acts 14 as we consider our work in the kingdom is that our abilities do not make us a God. Acts 14, I'm going to read verses 14 and 15 again. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them." Knowing that you are good at something, which I think we should all know, and capitalizing on those strengths, which I think we should all do, does not mean putting yourself above other people, and certainly does not mean putting yourself above God. With the knowledge of your ability to do incredible things comes the need for incredible humility. I think many of us have heard the phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility." I'd like to change that a little bit, and I'd like to propose that with great ability comes the need for great humility. Not a humility that discredits your ability, right? We talked about that. That's a false humility that says, "Oh, I'm not good for anything. I can't do anything well. Someone else should do it, right? They can do a better job than me." No, I'm talking about a humility that acknowledges that you are not better than other people, but you are going to try your best to be your best for God. And you're certainly not better than God because of that, but you want to give Him your best. You know, most people don't say or think of themselves as gods, right? That's not how you would describe yourself. Even if they're the most arrogant people, they might not say that. But you do not have to claim to be a God in order to act like one. And I think that's the danger for us. When we are good at something, we often believe that because we are good at that, we can control the future, right? We get to set the standards of right and wrong, or we believe that we have control over every aspect of our life, right? We start to maybe crave the praise of others. Look at our culture, right? The American culture. It's a blessing to be an American. We live in one of the most accomplished cultures in the history of the world. We've invented numerous amounts of technologies and different inventions. I like to watch the Olympics, and a few years ago, the Tokyo Olympics were on, and you may remember that the United States won the most gold medals of any country with 39, and we won the most medals overall with 113. Our culture is accomplished. I don't think anybody can deny that. And as a result, our culture likes to teach us that the future is in our hands, right? Plan out the rest of your life, and it will follow that plan perfectly. Truth is relative because we are each just the standard of our own perceptions of right and wrong. Seek to be honored because you deserve that. You deserve all the praise and all the glory, all the popularity, all the fame. Our culture teaches us that. And maybe the God of, we have the God of money, the God of our jobs, the God of success. Those are certainly, can be gods in our lives. But maybe those aren't the greatest God in our lives. Maybe the greatest God in America might just be ourselves. Don't fall into that trap. Your abilities are incredible. You all are incredible at what you do. And I don't know what that is, but you know what that is. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that your abilities make you deserving of praise, of honor, make you, able to control your future, make you the standard of right and wrong. Those all belong to God. Your abilities do not make you God. And Paul and Barnabas understood this. When they saw other people see them as gods and call them gods, it didn't just annoy them, right? It grieved them to the point that they tore their clothes. They had to run out to the crowds and stop them because they could not stand to be compared to God, because that's not at all what they were trying to do, right? They were trying to point others to God. Paul and Barnabas wanted there to be no question that they were simply human. And as you excel in whatever you do, leave no question in people's mind that you are simply human. You're good, but you're not God. Another lesson to be learned from Acts 14 is while we are not gods, it's important that we do not turn other people into gods. Look back in Acts 14. I'm going to read 11 through 13. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds." When someone does something incredible, it is just the human nature to want to tell them good job, to want to praise them, and to want to honor them for what they do. And that's not wrong. We have incredible people in our lives who need the encouragement, right? Sometimes we do something and we need the encouragement for what we've done. And I think we all have incredible people in our minds, in our lives, right? Whether they're celebrities or family figures or friends that we look up to that are inspirations to us. There's nothing wrong with that, but in many cases, it is so easy for our admiration to transform into worship. Our inspirations become our idols. And these perfect and ideal people, I remind you, become our ideals for success and accomplishment and perfection. And the way this plays out in our lives is often more subtle than the way the Lycaonians did it. I don't think many of us are actually worshiping people. I don't know when the last time it was that you offered a goat to someone, right? That's not how we worship people anymore. But sometimes we put people on a godlike pedestal in our minds. So I want to walk through this little mental exercise with you, something that I try and do as regularly as possible, that I think will be a good reminder for all of us. Think about the role models in your life, the earthly role models in your life. Maybe they're mentors, maybe they're peers, maybe they're parents, family, a celebrity. Who is that person for you or those people? I think we can all agree that we want to be like our role models. There's a reason that we respect them and we look up to them. Now, I want you to think about the time that you spend thinking about your role models. How much time in a day, in a week, in a month do you spend trying to be like them and thinking about them? Now, how much time do you spend in a day, in a week, in a month thinking about and trying to be like Christ? It's a very simple exercise, a very simple mental exercise, but it's a powerful reminder to me that I don't always think about Christ and being like Him as much as I think about trying to be like other people. And often the answer to the end result of that mental exercise is, once again, a very humbling experience, and it reminds me I need to think more about Christ and being like Him. Human role models are great. They can help us be better people, but no human can replace Christ. No human being should be our standard for perfection or success. Even our most, perfect, amazing, ideal role model is not perfect, really, when we think about it. They're sinful. They're flawed. They don't compare to Christ. Being like Christ is the goal. Christ is the only standard for perfection and for success. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, in verse 11 through 13. I want to read from there. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. It says this, "And He gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." Every person to have ever been an apostle or a prophet or a teacher or whatever you have done in the body of Christ, an evangelist, a shepherd, they have been tasked to build up the church in order to attain unity, maturity, and Christ-likeness. Now, there are no apostles or prophets today, right? We don't have them here now. But we certainly have teachers. We have shepherds. We have people who are trying to evangelize in their communities and around the world. Our mission as Christians is to pursue the one whose name that we wear. There are amazing people in this room who we can learn a great deal from, right? But do not make them into a god by trying to be like them. Christ is our King, our Lord, our God. He is our standard. Be like Him. So how do we guard ourselves against making other people into gods, even unintentionally? And we may not ever call it that, but sometimes that may be what it's more closely resembling to. Well, I think, first of all, as Ephesians 4, we need to look for God in creation. But don't look at creation as God. Look back at Acts chapter 14. If you're there, Acts chapter 14. I want to read verses 15 and 17. We've read this again, but just to remind you, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who did what? Made the heaven, made the earth, and the sea, and all that is in them. In the past generations He allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, yet He did not leave Himself without witness, for He did good by giving you what? The rains from heaven, the fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness." And even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them. What was Paul's point? He's telling them that the Lycaonians had it all backwards, right? They were worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. Paul says that instead of creation being God, the creation is meant to point to the one true God. The heavens, the earth, the sea, the rains, all point to the God who created them. So as we learn from mentors and peers, as we learn to be better at serving and sacrificing and suffering, focus on the way that your mentors and the people you look up to reflect and embody the beauty of Christ. And pursue that. That is exactly what the godly people in your life want from you. If somebody who you look up to is really a godly person, they don't want you to be like them. They want you to be like Christ. If anytime anyone wants you to be like them, maybe they don't have the right goal, the right mindset. If we are godly people, we want other people to be like Christ, not like us. As we think about Acts 14 and everything that we've talked about, there is one key point from this passage that I think that will help prevent us from falling into this trap of turning ourselves and others into gods. Go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 14. Look at verse 3. "So they remained for a long time, speaking boldly for the Lord, who bore witness to the word of His grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands." Paul and Barnabas were nothing on their own. Their evangelistic success, their effective use of their abilities, was only made possible by the Lord and their reliance on Him. And in the same way, we need to remember that we are nothing on our own. Apart from God, your athleticism, your kindness toward others, your financial expertise, your years of accumulated wisdom, your intelligence, they mean nothing apart from God. Our talents and our abilities are gifts from God. And because of that, you will never do anything of significance apart from God. Nothing. You may own every business on earth. You may rule every nation on earth. And apart from God, it means nothing. True success in life is only possible when we rely on God and devote our time and our energy and our abilities towards serving Him. He is the only one who can empower us to succeed and leave a lasting impact on this world. And when we truly understand that, it changes everything. It really does. Think about it. If we are nothing on our own, that changes our attitude, right? The humility we talked about earlier, well, that comes naturally if you realize that you are nothing on your own. It changes the way we view ourselves. We aren't God, right? Because anything that we've done is really because of God. We can't control the future because we know that only God knows the future. But we aren't the standard of right and wrong because we know that God's Word reveals what that is. We no longer crave praise because we want nothing more than to praise the one who empowered us to do everything that we've ever done in our life. It changes our view of other people. We stop idolizing people because if we are nothing on our own, they are nothing on their own. But rather, it is God who empowers everyone to do great things. And it changes our view about God. We're going to grow in love and respect and beautiful awe to our Creator because He is the one who gives us everything that we need and could ever want. It will increase our trust and our reliance on Him. As I said at the beginning of this lesson, you are good at something. I hope you know that. You are really, really good at something. And it's important that you understand that and that you find that. And when you find that, capitalize on it. Do your best at whatever that is. But at the same time, do it in a way that doesn't desire praise and desire worship. However, while those important lessons that we've talked about are all contained in Acts 14, maybe the main point of this passage, the main point of Paul and Barnabas' missionary journeys, and one of the key themes of the entire book of Acts is this. No matter your ability, the greatest good you can do and will ever do is to share the gospel with others and to point them to the one true living God. I want to read verse 15 one more time because it is so crucial to the story. Paul says, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you." But why are they there? What's their purpose? "And we bring you good news, that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them." The gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which gives us a relationship with Jesus Christ, is the most powerful, life-changing, world-changing story on earth. And really, it's more than just a story, right? It's a reality. If you're a Christian, then you realize how life-changing the gospel really is. You have a story of where you lived in sin and where you decided to become baptized and where your life changed forever. Share that story. The gospel helps us to know this great God that we worship, right? Why wouldn't we want other people to know Him? The same God who has blessed us with so many things, who has blessed us with talents and abilities to be able to do incredible things for Him. The same God who takes sinful, useless people and turns them into powerful soldiers for His kingdom. The greatest good we can ever do is to show people this God, to show people the God. And it's not me, and it's not you, but it's Him. And not only is this the most important and meaningful thing you will ever do, but it will remind you who truly is God. When you use your talents and your abilities to point other people to Him, it's impossible to worship yourself or other people. Showing people the source of life is going to bring you closer to the source of life itself. As we close, I want to share a story about this man. The man on your left in the kind of lighter blue shirt with the hat and the walking stick. This man's name is Chief Mamina. and he is a chief in the nation of Zambia. Zambia is where I lived for about 7 years with my family while they were missionaries there. Well, the backstory of Chief Mumina, he is an extremely successful, high-ranking figure in the nation of Zambia. Right next to him is the United States ambassador to Zambia. And so he's up in the government. He knows he's not the top dog, but he knows the top dog, if you know what I mean. He's up there, right? He's accomplished. Well, he's also a Christian. And way back in the early 2000s, he decided that he wanted his people, the nation, not the village he was chief over, to know more about Jesus, to have an opportunity to know the gospel. And so he put out the word to different people saying, I want people to come and teach my people about the gospel. Well, there was a group that answered the call, and they were an organization, a nonprofit organization called DAP. I don't remember what that stands for. They were some denominational organization, and they came, they did a lot of great things for agriculture, and they, handed out probably some spiritual lessons and things. But eventually their funding dried up and they had to leave. And when they had left, they had not taught people hardly anything. And honestly, the area of Mumina, where the chief is, was worse off than when they had arrived. Well, the chief still wanted somebody with a Christian influence to come in and help his people. So he put the word out again. This is when my family and our missionary team reached out to him. And we said, we're interested in coming and in being missionaries to your people. And he said, I'm interested, but what do you have to offer that is different than what they had to offer, the people that came before you? And the answer was the gospel. We wanted to do great things in terms of agriculture and helping small businesses and helping the economy, but none of that really mattered in the long run. What my family and our missionary team wanted to help them with was the gospel, right? And so the chief decided to let us come. And now there are 18 congregations of the Church of Christ in his chieftaincy. But it all started with Chief Mumina. He had ability, he had talent, he had power, financial power, political power, social power, even religious power. He could have used that for himself. He could have very easily been worshipped if he wanted to, but he made a decision to use his abilities and to use his talents for God, and to use them to glorify God instead of himself. He knew who really was God, and it wasn't him. Even if some of his people would have worshipped him, it wasn't him. And he made the decision to look for ways to glorify God and expand his kingdom. And now there are 18 members, or 18 congregations of the church in his area, all because of the decisions of one man. God has given you incredible abilities. Don't forget where they come from. God has given you role models in your life to help you grow, to help you learn. Don't forget where their abilities come from. But most importantly, as is on the screen, use your abilities to share the gospel and to bring others closer to the one and only God who has changed your life and who can change everyone else's life. Like I said at the end of my first lesson, we have a choice. All right, this is where we get to choose. Are we going to do this? Are we going to point people to the God, right? I hope that, as I talked about earlier this morning, we choose to serve and sacrifice and suffer, but I also hope that we choose to do that with the right attitude, one of humility, one of seeking the best for God and his kingdom and not ourselves. Because if we are serving and sacrificing so that we can gain, then we've really lost everything. But if we are serving and sacrificing so that God can gain, then we have won everything. But where are you? Are you willing to do that? I hope that you are. I'm trying to do that. I'm far from perfect, but I hope that we can all grow to do that. So if you have a need, whether you want to join the church or you need encouragement or prayers, whatever you need, we're here for you. And please come as we stand and as we sing.